Oh my gosh. Donald Trump is now the first former president to be convicted of a felony, which is crazy. Wild. Donald Trump had already been held liable for rape previously, but had not been yet criminally convicted until today, when a jury of 12 of his peers in New York City determined unanimously for 34 different counts of falsifying documents that Donald Trump was guilty of committing that felony. Lots of people are saying, "Oh, just a misdemeanor, just a misdemeanor." Technically, in the state of New York, it is only a misdemeanor to falsify business documents. That is correct. However, Donald Trump did not just falsify business documents. In the state of New York, it is a felony crime, a state felony, to falsify business documents in order to cover up another crime, in furtherance of another crime. Yo! Trump endorses Covey. Trump did endorse Covey, which was crazy. Trump 2025. Why are you roaring? What Trump is being tried for is falsifying business documents. That means that the Trump organization and the Trump campaign falsified their business documents by writing checks to Michael Cohen in order to reimburse him for paying off Stormy Daniels, who was a woman that Donald Trump had an affair with. And they labeled it as legal fees because they were paying Michael Cohen, who was a lawyer, and they tried to make it seem like those were his legal fees, when in reality they were reimbursement fees to Michael Cohen for paying off Stormy Daniels. But yeah, Donald Trump is convicted of falsifying business documents in the furtherance of a different separate crime. Technically, the jury doesn't have to decide on what that separate crime was, and there are several different options that the jury can go with. One is election interference, which you're not allowed to use campaign funds to hide information that the public will be able to use to make informed decisions when voting. Daddy Donald. What the heck was I saying? Y'all are distracting me. I'm just going to have to stop paying attention to the chat for a second. I can't remember what all 34 counts are, but each count is like for a separate document, and they wrote checks to Cohen as legal fees, and they allotted them out over like 2 years or something like that. And so like most of those are like each individual check that they wrote to Michael Cohen. So in 2006, the reason why Trump falsified the business records to begin with was to cover up his affair that he had with a adult film actress named Stormy Daniels. She was really keen on getting on the Celebrity Apprentice, and so was like working to get a better relationship with Trump. Trump was immediately very attracted to her. She maintains to this day that she was not raped, that he did not sexually assault her. However, the way that the story goes, they were going like out to eat, and she met him at his hotel room. And whenever he opened the door, he was in like a robe, like in a bathrobe. And he was like, "Oh, well, why don't you come in? I've got to change." And so she like came in, and whenever she turned around, he had taken off the bathrobe and was naked, and was kind of like blocking the door. And he propositioned her, and she went along with it. And yeah, it's not a pretty story. They had intercourse. They had sex. She does say that she only had sex with him to like get out of the room faster. And so she gets out. He's calling her like the next day and for days after, wanting to like meet up again. But she's really keen on getting on the Celebrity Apprentice, and so she's really pushing harder to get on the Celebrity Apprentice. And it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly that he doesn't actually have any intention of getting her on the Celebrity Apprentice. And So they stopped talking. All that happened in 2006. So this is a long time ago. 10 years later, 2016, Donald Trump is running for election. And she is, because he's obviously like a popular figure now, and her story would be very valuable to people. She's looking to sell her story for a lot of money, for a good buttload of cash. And nobody's really biting. Nobody really cares about Stormy Daniels' story about how she one time slept with Donald Trump. Because, this is sex between two consenting adults. It is adultery, but it's not, it's not that scandalous. Then, about 1 month before the election in 2016, the Access Hollywood tape comes out. The famous tape where Donald Trump is caught on a hot mic talking about how, women, sometimes you just gotta grab them, advocating sexual assault on women. So now all of a sudden people become much more interested in purchasing Stormy Daniels' story. This is where a man named David Pecker comes into play. The National Enquirer is that magazine that you see in the grocery aisle. David Pecker is the head of the National Enquirer. And David Pecker is a friend of Donald Trump's. David Pecker has a catch and kill scheme with Donald Trump, where he would buy the rights to stories that were negative about Donald Trump and then not run them. He had done this with several people. One was another lady that said she had an affair with Donald Trump, and a doorman at the Trump Hotel who said that he knew that Donald Trump had a secret kid. And the secret kid thing turns out not to be true. But it didn't matter if it was true or not. Some magazine might hear of this story and want to run it. And to prevent that from happening, David Pecker for the National Enquirer would go and buy the rights to these people's stories by paying them a bunch of money and have the exclusive rights to the story and then not run it. So nobody else can run the story. Oh, good Lord. Why did you have to say something, Cameron? You summoned him like an evil genie. What do you want?
Frankly, is someone there?
Yeah.
Are people listening? Frankly, I want the world to know.
Hold on, guys. We got Donald Trump here live from New York City to give us his
they have me in handcuffs.
His reaction. Well,
lock them away. Frankly, each jury member, if you look up their address, which I did, I looked up their address, and they're all from blue states, all from blue counties.
Yeah.
It's a rigged election, frankly. They're out to get me.
Well, they live in Manhattan, so that would make sense that they were from blue counties.
They're taking me away right now, and they have me in handcuffs, and I just wanted to...
Well, that can't possibly be true, Mr. President, because they're not going to sentence you to jail. The sentencing is on July 11th.
No, you're not listening to me. They have me in jail right now. This is my one phone call, and I decided to call you. They don't realize who I am. I have some money. I paid off Stormy Daniels with some of it, and I can pay off these guards.
Now you're changing your story, Mr. President, because you've maintained that you didn't know Stormy Daniels and that you never paid her any money.
You're right.
That Michael Cohen's a liar.
I know who Stormy Davids is. I know no Stormy Davids or her work. I have to go. They're putting me in the cop car. They're scrunching my head down.
Wait,
don't touch the hair. Don't touch the hair. Goodbye.
Okay, goodbye.
Love you very much.
Good Lord, Jesus. Anyways, that was the president, and he says that he didn't do it. So that is what Donald Trump maintains. They're putting him in the cop car in the jail. That is what Trump maintains, is that if Stormy Daniels was paid any money at all, she was paid by Michael Cohen without Trump's knowledge whatsoever. And if that is true, then Michael Cohen is the one who's guilty of falsifying these business documents and not Donald Trump. Donald Trump has to have knowledge that this was being used, that had knowledge that these business documents were being falsified in the furtherance of a separate crime, which was either like manipulating the outcome of the election and election interference, or campaign finance fraud, or tax fraud. But if he committed this crime, falsifying the business documents in furtherance of any one of those other crimes, then he is guilty of a felony, which is what the jury unanimously said that he did do. He maintains that he didn't know anything about it. Michael Cohen maintains that he did so with the explicit direction of Donald Trump. So David Pecker buys the exclusive rights to the story. However, David Pecker does not buy the exclusive rights to the story. He makes contact with Stormy Daniels, but directs Stormy Daniels' lawyer to get in touch with Michael Cohen because David Pecker refuses to pay for the rights for Stormy Daniels' story because he already paid for the rights to the other lady who says that Trump had an affair with her and the doorman at the Trump Tower. He already paid for those, and Trump refused to reimburse him for those. So he kept on dragging his feet on reimbursing him. And so whenever this third one came around, David Pecker was like, hey, you need to get in touch with Michael Cohen, and he needs to figure out a way to reimburse you because I'm not going to do it because Donald Trump won't pay me back. Michael Cohen then makes contact with Stormy Daniels' lawyer, and they start negotiating on a price. Eventually, they settle on $131,000, I think, something like that, $131,000. Michael Cohen then goes to the bank and gets a home equity loan, like to start a new business from the bank, puts his house up as collateral to get this loan for $130,000, uses that money to pay off Stormy Daniels, and then is going to get reimbursed and then use that to pay off the loan. And so he uses that money to pay off Stormy Daniels. He's going to use that money to pay off Stormy Daniels, but Trump keeps on telling him, drag your feet, drag your feet, drag your feet. Because this was only about a month out from the election. And if he can put off paying Stormy Daniels this money until after the election, then it won't matter anymore. So this is pretty explicitly Donald Trump demonstrating that he only paid Stormy Daniels off to influence the outcome of the election. He's not worried about, because that can be the defense. He can use campaign funds to pay off the porn star that he had an affair with, completely legally. It would have been totally fine for Trump to have used $130,000 of campaign funds to pay off a porn star that he had an affair with in order to keep her quiet in an election. If he had done so because he was worried that his wife and family was going to find out about it, and he didn't care about the election, he just worried about keeping it from his wife. That's perfectly legal because other politicians have done that in the past and used that as a defense. That's what they have to prove in this case, is that he made this payment to Stormy Daniels not because he cared about his wife, but to specifically influence the way that the information that people had when voting. Cohen even testifies that he asked Donald Trump, what do you think will happen whenever Melania figures out about this? And Donald Trump's response was, how long do you think I would be on the market for? Michael Cohen does eventually agree to pay Stormy Daniels this money and gives her this $130,000. Trump now has to reimburse Michael Cohen for that money that he paid to her. So the Trump campaign writes several checks. I can't remember how many. Writes several checks and marks them down in their business filings as legal fees to Michael Cohen to reimburse him, but they're saying that they're legal fees because they don't want anybody to know that they made this, a hush money payment. They specifically write the checks, the total amount for all of the checks is like double what Cohen's legal fees, what the reimbursement was, $130,000, because they're writing it down that they're legal fees, which is income, which means they'll get taxed like income, which means Cohen won't actually get $130,000 at the end of the day. So they pay him a bunch extra so that it can be taxed and he can still be left with $130,000 to cover the payment that he made. So this is another, like this is falsifying these business records to, one, say that they're legal fees, but two, to say that these legal fees were more than what was actually being fined to the campaign. Donald Trump insists upon personally signing every check that's sent to Michael Cohen. So he signs over a dozen checks, like 2 dozen checks to Michael Cohen, and never once asked. This is why his defense doesn't really hold any water. He's like, I didn't know that Michael Cohen paid this lady any money. You personally signed over a dozen checks to Michael Cohen over the course of months and never once asked anybody, what are these checks for? There's all this testimony about the fact that Donald Trump was an intense micromanager. And so would always ask about where money was going. He didn't just pay somebody nothing for no reason. It's not likely at all that he didn't know what these payments were going towards. And it goes, directly against Michael Cohen's testimony, because Michael Cohen says that he knew exactly what the payments were for and knew exactly that he was falsifying these business records in order to cover up this payment. And that's how we got to where we are today. So the Alvin Bragg is the DA for the Manhattan District of New York, and prosecuted Donald Trump. OMG, finally. Prosecuted Donald Trump for falsifying these business records, these checks, and saying that they were legal fees to cover up in another crime, in furtherance of another crime. And that they don't necessarily have to prove what that other crime is, or even necessarily that Donald Trump is guilty of that crime. They just have to prove that he was covering up. He was doing so with the intention of covering up what he perceived to be a different crime. And those other crimes are tax fraud, campaign finance fraud, and election interference. And the jury can believe that it was any of those or all of those. They don't have to be unanimous on which one of those that they thought that it was, but they do have to be. Long story short, Trump is a convicted felon now. That is true. They do have to be unanimous that Trump did falsify these business records to further a different crime. And every member of that 12-member jury was unanimous that this is what Donald Trump did for every count of falsified business records. 34 different counts. So now Trump is a criminal, officially. That's exciting. But he is still capable of, one, running for president, and two, voting in the election. In many states, felons cannot vote, and certainly in the state of Florida, felons cannot vote. However, the state of Florida defers to whatever state you got the felony conviction in. So because Donald Trump got his felony conviction in New York State, the state of Florida will defer on whether or not he's allowed to vote to whatever the rules are in New York. And the rules are in New York that if you are in prison for a felony, you cannot vote. But as soon as, before you go into prison or after you get out of prison, then you can vote again. So he will technically be able to vote in the state of Florida in the election. He definitely can run for president. The Secret Service has already collaborated with New York jail to figure out security for what would happen there, have already collaborated with whatever prison he would go to, like New York prisons, to see what security would be like there. But it's almost certain that this judge seems very, very reluctant to put Donald Trump in jail, and seems very cognizant of the role that he's playing in this really historic moment. How can a convicted felon run for president? That is crazy. There is nothing in the Constitution that explicitly forbids a convicted felon from running for president. It is crazy, but that is true. And I mean, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a good thing. The legal system can be used as a tool to go after political enemies. And so if the legal system was used as a tool to go after a political enemy, then you could use that as a mechanism for silencing your political rivals by using the legal system against them to make them all felons, and now they can't run for president. And so it is kind of good that a convicted felon can't run for president, can still run for president. It should matter in the court of public opinion that he is a felon, and therefore would not get nominated to become the president, would not get elected to become the president. But this is the world that we live in. He almost certainly will become the Republican nominee for president. And I'm going to say almost certainly is going to win in November. and become the next president of the United States. Depending on what the sentencing is like in July, on July 11th, he will get sentenced by the judge, and the judge will decide whether or not he will serve prison time, which he almost certainly will not. But if he does, Donald Trump we could theoretically see a future where Donald Trump fulfills the responsibility of being president from a prison cell, which is crazy. That's wild. Donald Trump is almost certainly going to be the president because Democrats are awful. Hate Democrats, and they've messed this election up royally by just doing like all the same kinds of like voter interference that Donald Trump does, just legally, not technically the same kind of election interference that Donald Trump does because he did his illegally, and the Democrats are doing theirs legally. But like they've canceled primaries in states, they've intimidated challengers from running against Joe Biden, and the DNC now is moving to a completely online based venue. So like the Republican nominating convention will happen in person, and everybody will be there going, hooray, yay, Trump. The Democratic nominating convention will happen basically on a Zoom call because they're so terrified of pro-Palestinian protests happening, which is crazy. Joe Biden is trailing behind Donald Trump in almost every conceivable poll right now. And it's looking very possible that Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. Now, we'll see what polling says after the fact that he's a convicted felon now. We'll see just how much that moves the needle. I don't know how much is going to move the needle, frankly. I think it's going to be, I think for the people who are really, really committed to Donald Trump, they're going to remain committed to Donald Trump. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to demonstrate that every time he gets indicted for these crimes, his poll numbers actually go up amongst people who are firm supporters of Donald Trump. The fact that my children will read about this in their history books is insane. Your children will 100% learn about the Donald Trump era of American history in the same way that like we learn about the Nixon era of American history. I mean, more so because Donald Trump is way worse than Nixon ever was, and is now a convicted felon. But we'll see what polling says after this. Like I said, people who are committed to Donald Trump probably are not going to change very much, but Donald Trump only won last time that he won by like 80,000 votes. And so his victory was pretty marginal before the swing votes that are in the margins who will likely be affected by the fact that he's a convicted felon now may make or break this next election. We'll see what happens. But if polling continues the way that it's been continuing, it seems kind of likely that Donald Trump might be the next president of the United States, which is crazy.